Julie, you're on the line. All good?
I am here.
Awesome. So,
What are we doing, Hadi?
what are we doing? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to do a simple example of showing how to actually do entity framework, an application with entity framework, maybe using, I don't know, I'm familiar with ASP.NET MVC, so I thought, well, we could make a quick little web application using entity framework. And
Okay.
now, I'm not kind of like a drag and drop guy, so I hate the whole, the visual designer and dragging and dropping and creating tables visually and stuff like that.
So you'll probably want to use code first.
Yeah, which basically means that I write my code and then Entity Framework works around that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So there's just to be clear, there's two ways to work with Entity Framework: the designer or the getting the well, there's a third way. No, I mean, you can also do give Entity Framework a database and then just from there generate everything that's required.
Can I clarify that a little bit?
Yes, please do.
What you're really talking about is just the part where you design a model. So you can design your entity framework model either in a visual designer by starting with you can start with a database and reverse engineer that and then continue to work with design the model in the designer, or you can start with an empty designer and just design your model and let entity framework or the designer actually create the database for you. Or if you don't like to use a designer at all, you can just write code that represents your classes and then use the code first API to let Entity Framework be able to work with it. So the model is just part of it. The model is just defining what model you're working with, but there's a lot more to Entity Framework than just creating the model. There's actually doing all that interaction, writing queries and change tracking and updating stuff to the database that you do with the Entity Framework APIs.
Okay, so we're going to go with the model. So I was thinking what we can do is maybe just I don't know. I mean, you do a lot of speaking yourself, right? So how about
Yes, I talk a lot.
Yes, you do.
Sorry.
Yeah, my wife keeps saying that to me as well. It's like you talk a lot, but you don't say much. I don't know what that means, but anyway. So I thought we can either do well, we could do a kind of like a customer and contacts, or I thought let's be extravagant and let's do maybe like a speaker and sessions. What do you think?
Oh, okay.
Is that
yeah? There's no reason to have a super complex model just for taking a look at how things work.
Yeah.
So that works for me.
If we just do kind of like a speaking and then a conference, for example, that we have a speaker and then the speaker has one or more sessions. How's that sound? Okay.
Sounds great.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead, since it's a web app, I'm going to go ahead and create a web app for myself. And I'm going to call it the conference app. And I'll put that in just so that people get the code later on. We'll put it in Julie.
Okay. And as you're doing this, I already have a comment about how you're starting this, but I think taking advantage of ReSharper, this is not going to be a problem. I usually start by defining my business domain, my model. So I usually start by creating the classes that represent my domain in a project. So for example, the speakers and the sessions, and then I create another project that is the part where Entity Framework does its job. And then I create my application, my kind of UI end of the application that uses those things. So I imagine we're going to be able to end up with that same kind of result by starting this way.
Yeah,
I just want to point out that already that's not even the way I would start. So,
okay. I mean, I was
I'm not saying don't start this way.
Okay, I mean, I was actually going to do this, and then I was going to ask you if normally, I mean, I don't normally put any of my domain logic, so to call it, or whatever, inside the same web application. So I was going to say, should we create a second class library? So in actual fact, I was just.
Well, you can still start this way.
Okay, so I'll do this, and I'm going to call this guy web, and let me just go ahead and create, I don't know, an internet application, I guess. We can have all the nice little templates. So, and then what I'm going to do is I'll create a second project, which is going to host my other stuff. So
I see so many demos where somebody just creates an MVC app and then just everything is inside of there.
Yeah, no.
Like the entire logic of the application. I know that's not how you write applications.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to the extent possible, let's try and stay away from demoware, or at least point out where you wouldn't normally do something like this.
Yeah, which is why I mentioned that.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is after I create this project, I'll go ahead and create a class library. Okay, so I can create a second one here. Now, by the way, I'm using OS X. I'm using a virtual machine inside a Mac. So if anything goes weird, blame the Mac. Conference.
Isn't that what all us Microsoft developers do anyway?
Yeah.
Blame the Mac.
Well, apparently now, oh, we won't get political. I promise not to get political. Even though I'm drinking wine.
I won't even hint in that direction.
We're not going to say anything.
Because you're too easy. Yeah. Okay, so...
Okay, so now I have my class, which is I'll call core instead of a better name. And I have my web application. Okay. So what do I do now?
Well, for me, if I will, with my, I'm hesitating because I don't know how you would do things differently by taking better advantage of ReSharper than I do. I would start by defining my speaker and session classes.
Okay, so I can just.
But you may not need to do it in that direction with ReSharper.
Oh well, I mean we can do it. So basically, we're going to call this a speaker, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this. So I'll just say speaker, and because I love the fact that still in 2012 they create create class library with a file name class1, which is absolutely no use to anyone. But anyway, so I've just renamed that, and that's where I've used ReSharper. You know that one, right? Control RR to rename something in ReSharper?
Me? No.
Oh.
Control RR. I have two favorite quotes, and I really have to get away from them and believe more about myself. But one of them is, I am not a sysadmin, and the other is that I can only learn one new keystroke combination a year.
Okay, so.
But I have faith in myself. I think I can keep doing that. So this is why we're doing this, because I'm like, oh, you can do that. I'm always like right-clicking. I use the mouse to do everything.
Yeah. Okay, so if it's going to be one keyboard shortcut a year, forget that Control RR.
I think I can handle more. I'm going to start working on it.
Okay. So yeah, actually,
I'm inspired.
What I normally do and what I normally recommend to people is, and I do it myself all the time with new applications that I start working with, is unplug the mouse, and that includes the touchpad as well. And just if you have to do something, look it up via the menu. So for example, what I just did there was Control RR, which is to refactor. It's a shortcut to refactor, which in my case, I want to do a refactoring rename. So it will be Control RR. And if I didn't know that, what I would do is go to ReSharper and then go under refactor and then see that there's an option which is rename, right? So
and without the mouse, I'd probably get so sick of having to do that with a keyboard all the time that I would force myself to remember the shortcut.
Exactly. So you keep having to go here, but you don't click it. I never click it, right? So I look at it and then I come back and I press the keyboard combination. So I don't actually use the menu at all. I just look at the menu to look it up, and then I come back here and do the keyboard combination. And then you do that a couple of times, and the third, fourth time you start to just gradually remember those keyboard shortcuts. And of course, in Visual Studio 2012, you also have the quick launch up here, right? So you can press Control Q and then put refactor.
Oh yeah, I love that.
And this guy should work as well. You see, it says refactor rename.
Oh,
right?
that's going to show the ReSharper
Yeah.
shortcuts, not just Visual Studio ones.
Exactly. So we actually have we have to integrate with that, right? So if in fact, I could probably just not mess things up and write where are we? If I just do the Control Q and rename, it should also, you see, it brings out ReSharper's rename. So now I know it's Control RR. Okay, so that makes it even easier to remember keyboard shortcuts and learn new keyboard shortcuts for ReSharper. Okay.
That's great.
Right. So now I'm going to write my speaker. So each speaker has an ID. So I will. So again, I'm going to use the ReSharper shortcut template here. I just write prop. Templates in ReSharper are kind of like the code snippets. We have our own, so I can just write prop, hit tab, and then you see.
I use this one all the time.
Okay, so you know this one, cool. So
yeah, I love that one.
This is int, and then this is ID, and then a speaker also has. You think we should give speakers name? Yeah, we'll give them a name, and we'll give them also an email, and I wonder if we should give speakers any ratings, maybe stars 1 to 5. No. What else do speakers have? That's about it, right? Name, email.
You know, you could get, if you wanted to have a more complex model, you could start getting into, you know, expertise and categories and things like that. But a Twitter handle, wait, that's the most important thing in the world.
Absolutely right, Twitter handle. Okay, done.
Most important thing. So let me tell you something about your ID with respect to Entity Framework. It's actually really convenient that you happen to name it ID. When you're using code first, well, I'll back up a little bit. With Entity Framework, every entity that you're managing has to have a key property. That's how it is able to track it. And also, you know, identify relationships and things like that. So everything has to have a key property. With Code First, Code First uses convention over configuration. So it starts with convention, which is its assumptions. And the two conventions for identifying a key property inside of a class are either that the property is named ID, which yours is, or the name of the type plus ID. So ID or speaker ID would automatically get recognized as the entity key. So without even realizing it, you're just, you know, Entity Framework would just work here, like so in terms of
I could name
understanding
that speaker ID as well, right?
Yeah, but if you say you had named it something different that didn't happen to follow that convention, but happens to follow your own naming conventions, maybe you call it speaker key or something like that, then when you start trying to use the part of our application that will have Entity Framework and do all the data access and persistence, Code First is going to say, hey, I can't find a key in speaker, so I can't do anything here. But there's a way to then use configuration. Remember, it's convention over configuration. So it starts with a convention. If you're failing those assumptions, then you can use configurations to say, oh, no, this is the key.
And what is that? An attribute or something that I would stick?
Well, there's two ways to do it. One way is using data annotations, and therefore it's an attribute. So the attribute is key. You can even use the key attribute even if you've got convention. If just, you know, it's not going to say, I already know that, don't tell me. No, it's just plain old key. So and that's in nope. You don't even need the parens. It's just key.
Okay.
And it is system. That's exactly right. That's in data annotation.
Okay.
That's it. So if your property if the property that you want to be that key property doesn't happen to match convention, you can just use this data annotation key to say, no, this is the one. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
There's also, if you don't want to use data annotations, there's also something called the Fluent API, which is the imperative way of doing it, and it doesn't involve your domain classes. You can keep all of that logic for the configurations along with the rest of your Entity Framework code.
Okay, cool. Right. So we're going to say that a speaker has a bunch of sessions, right?
Okay.
So that would be an IEnumerable, I would say.
Well, I actually would I would use, if you want to use something generic, I would use an I collection. The reason is, no, sometimes a list would be satisfactory also. I like to use interfaces because it gives me more flexibility down the road for my application. Using an I collection sets me up for the possibility of my wanting to take advantage of Entity Framework lazy loading. And if I want to use lazy loading to get these sessions, then I'll need to have that be an I collection. If I don't want to use lazy loading, I can use, a list, an I list, or whatever you want.
So if I want lazy loading, it has to be an I collection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, having an I collection doesn't say, okay, now lazy loading is going to happen. There's other things you need to do to make lazy loading active. But if lazy loading is active and that's not an I collection, those things won't get lazily loaded.
Okay, that's good to know.
Which is interesting because it gives you the ability to control what properties do and don't get lazy loaded, because that's also something you might want to do.
Okay, so I'm going to have sessions, right? And this is going to be sessions, and again, and a set. Now,
I would rename that type session though. The type in the generic. Singular.
Oh yeah, sorry, session. Yeah. So you see that now what I'm going to do is, this is where I use ReSharper to create this guy, which is what we call the create from usage. So this is the bulb, which you can just click on and then select the item, but you should never use the mouse to click on this. You always do Alt-Enter.
Okay, and that's what I do a lot.
Enter. So I say create class session, okay? And now this one, I can say, for example, this has, again, an int ID, and in fact, you know what? We're going to call this guy session ID. So just to show that it works, as you said, it should.
Maybe a title and a description.
String title and string description. And we're going to do a int, or actually, let's do an enum. That would be good, because then I can know what session level, we call it, right?
Yeah, and this is great because this is something we can do now with .NET 4.5 when we're using Entity Framework.
Okay.
Entity Framework 5 and .NET 4.5 is we can have enum support. And the great thing with Code First and the enum support is you don't really have to do anything special. You just write your regular .NET code for enums, and Entity Framework will work it out.
Okay. So now watch this. I see this happen a lot to people. What they do is, right, I just said to you that you can create this with Alt-Enter, right? And then what I see people do is take the mouse and move to this and then hit Alt-Enter, okay? What I also see people do is come here and then start going back with the cursor, or use the command, or if they're running Windows, they can do that. Oh dear, did I just mess everything up? Yes.
That was a Windows command.
That was a Windows command. Yep. Okay. Now what you can do is, actually in ReSharper, if you go to the menu, you can say navigate, inspect, and you can see that you have next issue in file and previous issue in file, right? With Alt page down and Alt page up. So in essence, what this means that with ReSharper, you can easily navigate to the next or previous issue in the file, right? So I could hit that and go directly to the actual issue, which is the thing that I want to create, right? Because the issue that I have closest to me is the thing that I've just written that doesn't exist, and I want to create it.
Oh, that's right. Because I've noticed when I have ReSharper, it'll have the bulb, but there might be a couple of issues just in one line of code, and you have to your cursor has to be on the correct one
for it to highlight the problem.
To give you the context of what you want to do with that one.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's like the whole line, like it says, oh, you can make this could be a link expression instead of what you've written, but you won't see that unless you're highlighting the whole line or something.
Yeah, and those issues, I mean, they appear here on the right hand side, right?
Yeah.
Those little things that I don't know if you've seen that. If you've seen
I go through them. I try to get everything green.
Yeah. Well, have you
make
seen,
all the yellows and reds go away?
Have you seen that? The best form of code review? I don't know if you've seen this comic. It's quite famous. Let's hit on images and let's see if it comes up. Nope. I don't know why that came up. Code reviews. Here you
Whoa! Why are there always bras and panties?
I don't know.
No matter what?
I don't know why best form of code review comes up with bras. But, this is the code review, right? Behind the closed door, how many WTFs per minute are kind of coming out from good code and from bad, right? So I always call these side things of ReSharper the code review, the WTFs of ReSharper, right? Anyway, so coming back here, I can create this session level, right? And there you go. Now I'm gonna show you something else before I do this, right? I'm gonna show you how there's a different way to do this. Anywhere, anytime, in any place from ReSharper, inside a file, if you press Control-Alt-Insert, right, you get a little menu come up, okay? And this menu allows you to create files quickly. These are called ReSharper's file templates, and you can actually configure these and adapt them to your own needs. By default, you get class, interface, structure, enum, and if you're in, for example, an ASP.NET web application, it also allows you to create, for example, a web form or an ASP.NET Razor view, etc. Right? So that's Control-Alt-Insert. If you hit that combination, you get this from anywhere. So I can just hit that, select enum, and then say session level, right? And immediately that will create a file for me, and it will place that in its own file, right? So I don't have to create from usage either. Okay?
Okay, because the other way, by saying, hey, session level's not understood, you want to create it, it creates it as a class and it puts it in that same file. This way you get the enum that you want. You just have to type the name in yourself.
Well, you can also get a class because an enum, because watch, if I just write public, let me show you here. For instance, I write public class ABC, and then here do, for instance, prop def, right? That doesn't exist. But if I hit Alt-Enter and I say create class, you see that the first option allows me to select what I want.
Okay. Cool.
What you're saving here is you're actually not having to then refactor that and move it to its own file.
Into its own file, right.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say session level for novice, novice equals 1.
You're like me. I like to explicitly define those member values.
Okay. So what would happen if I
no,
didn't
it's great.
do this?
If you didn't, then if you wanted to come back and modify that enum sometime, maybe you don't want to have novices anymore and you take them out and it was just, by default, it would just screw up what the values are and your database stored persisted values would be all wrong.
So then if we don't
even
specify...
John Skeet recommends that.
Yeah. I mean, I normally do it, but just so that it's clear then, if I understand, if I don't specify that, Entity Framework's going to just enumerate them top down, and if I come back tomorrow...
not really Entity Framework. .NET will do it, and then Entity Framework will just take whatever values .NET assumes for that, infers for those.
Correct. Okay, so here's another quick trick. If you want to go back to the place you were previously, where you were editing, use Control-Shift-Backspace, right?
Oh.
And that takes you immediately back to where you last were, okay? Another actually cool shortcut to move back and forth from where you were is if you press Control, comma, it's going to show you recent files that you've just visited, right? So I've got session level and I've got home controller. And if I press Control Shift, comma, it's going to show me recent edits. So it's going to show me the recent files that I've just edited. So this is really useful if you're just like playing around with 2 or 3 files. You can always press Control Shift, comma, and then navigate through these really rapidly.
Very cool.
And
I'm writing these all.
Can we have some questions for Julie?
Yeah, we got questions for you, Julie.
Yep. So
Yeah.
First question comes from Joseph Halstead, and the question is, does Entity Framework only work with the server database, or will it also work with containers such as SQLite or FoxPro?
Entity Framework is designed to be able to work with a variety of databases. It does have to be a relational database, but as long as there is a database provider that's written to work with Entity Framework, then you can use that. I don't know if there's one for a FoxPro database, but yeah, SQLite. There's a couple for Oracle. There's a ton of them actually. There's a whole lot of providers. You even need a different provider for SQL CE, and Microsoft obviously creates that one. So out of the box, like you install Visual Studio, the SQL client DLL, the SQL client assembly is there, and that gives you the ability to use Entity Framework with SQL Server. But you can find all kinds of providers so that you can interact with different relational databases with Entity Framework.
Great. Another question from Hassan Savran, and the question is, what happens if you have more than one ID in the class?
Oh, you can have a composite ID. Just a database understands composite keys, and Entity Framework understands them as well. So you could just mark all of the properties that you want to be a composite key with a key annotation, and then Entity Framework will understand to use those as a composite key when it interacts with a database. And when it does, it tracks the entity.
All right, and one more question. Will using IEnumerable not work with lazy loading? Because you seem to have a comment there saying for lazy loading you need to use an iCollection.
I'm gonna take the Fifth Amendment on that one. For those of you who are American, you'll understand that. Just because this was definitely a rule when we were in .NET 4 and Entity Framework 4. I don't know that it's changed, and I haven't explored that. So unfortunately, I can't tell you off the top of my head. It's the kind of thing I would just test it and see. But I do believe it needs to be an iCollection, but I'm like 98% sure on that.
All right, we're getting a comment here saying that it works with anything that's iCollection or derives. There's another question here. How does Entity Framework's code first handle stored procedures?
Code first does not have as much support for stored procedures as when you're using an EDMX with a designer. What you can do with stored procedures with code first is you just have to call them explicitly off of DB context or the DB set. So you can't map directly, say, okay, anytime I update speaker to the database, instead of creating SQL, please use this. You can point to the stored procedure you want it to use automatically instead. So you can't do that mapping. You would have to explicitly call stored procedures and execute them either using the DB context or a DB set.
All right, thanks a lot, Julie. That's it for questions for now.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Dima. So let's continue. So what I'm going to do is I like to keep my stuff nice and clean, Julie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Alt-Enter and say move this guy to another file, right? And I'll use that. There's another way of doing this as well, but we'll leave it for there for now. Hopefully I'll show you the other way later. Okay, so I'm done. Right, so now I have my session, and Control-T, I'm going to go to my speaker. Did I just, yeah, I've got my speaker. There you go. Okay. So I've got my speaker, I've got my session, I've got my enum. What do I do now? So let's say that.
Well, let's look at session. Let's look at session again. And remember that we've got the sessions. We've got a pointer from speaker to session. So by default, code first will understand that when it comes to the database, that we have a one-to-many relationship between speaker and session. And code first will infer that we're going to have a speaker ID, in the table that represents session.
Yeah.
There will be a speaker ID in there, even though we don't have it in this class. And anytime you do queries, get data back, do updates, things like that, Entity Framework will be sure that that speaker ID is taken into account.
Okay. So
but just so you know, you won't be able to. So it'll understand that, but you won't be able to navigate from session back to speaker if you ever want to do that.
Okay, which in my case I don't want to. I just want to click on a speaker and see all the sessions he's got. Okay, right. So we can revisit that later on if we have time, if you want, and you can tell me how I would do it if I want to be able to navigate back. So what I want to do now basically is let's go over to my application, to the web, and I'll show you how you can do that. Because remember that I told you that Control T will take you to a specific class, right? And you know that you can actually type, if I want to go, for example, to home controller, I don't have to type out home controller. I can just type HC, and that will also provide me home controller. Because
so it's aware of everything that's in the solution.
Yeah, and HC is the camel case in lowercase for home controller, right?
Okay.
So what
I also want to point out one more thing. We've got our MVC application and we have our domain classes, but we still don't have Entity Framework in here.
Okay, which is what? Well, I want to kind of redrive this from my usage scenario. So so let me go over to my conference app and let's look at it from there.
Right, because I do it from your perspective. I do it backwards. I build it up backwards. You can do it from the top down.
Okay, so what I was going to say, if I press Control Shift T, I can go to a file as opposed to type. So I could still go like, I don't know, index, and that would take me to index inside my application, right? And a cool trick, if you want to navigate over to the actual solution, to the project, what you can do is Control Shift T, and you write CS Proj, and that will show you all of the projects. So I can say web, and you can see that now I can focus
right, because it's a file.
Yeah. I can focus on this and show it, etc. So what I want to do is I'm going to come over here and note that the alt insert also works from here. So I could write a new class, and I'm going to call this guy. What am I going to call this guy? Yeah, speaker controller, right? And then
yes, speakers need to be controlled.
Definitely. And I'm going to inherit from controller. And you see that now alt enter, which will create that for me. And what I'm going to do is create, and watch this. I'm going to create an action, I'm going to create an action, and I don't have to type out action result. I can just write ACTR, and again, camel case, we'll pick it up, hit enter, and then say, for example, index. And one of my favorite ones is the what do you call it? The complete statement. So a lot of times here, for instance, if I'm here, instead of putting a semicolon, I can just press Shift Control Enter, and that will complete the statement for me, which in this case, it's going to insert a semicolon, right? But that complete statement isn't only about inserting semicolons. It'll do everything. It'll complete all kinds of statements. So here, what is this? This is a function. So I can, or method, I can hit Shift Control Enter, and it will complete that for me, right? So you see, I didn't have to put those braces or anything like that. In fact,
oh, good. I always have a hard time still hitting those brace keys. Like, without, sometimes I just have to look at the keyboard to find them for some reason.
Well, this, I mean, watch. I mean, even if I have one bracket, I can just press Shift Control Enter, and it'll do that. So I'll do return view, and now it's going to say to me that doesn't exist. So I'm going to go and create that, and let me just. No, you don't do that, you naughty boy. I'm going to create an index with that instead of using ReSharper. So actually, I won't do that just yet. Okay, let's go back here. So here, I want to get a list of speakers. So I would say var speakers equals, and now normally what I would do in an application is I would have this repository where I would get a list of my data from.
Yeah.
I'm guessing we do the same thing here, right?
Yep.
So I could do, for example,
That's how I would do it.
so I would do, for example, speaker repository, and we could do a get all. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have to plan ahead for all this stuff
Yeah.
and have the speaker repository already existing. You're going to just kind of create it now.
Yeah. So now, since this is underscore, so it's following the convention of ReSharper, which you could change. It says you want to create the field speaker repository. Yes, I do. So this is going to be an iSpeaker repository, which again doesn't exist. And then here you see that it's blue. It's saying, do you want to initialize this from the constructor, which I do, which is using dependency injection. So I do that, and then it goes green and it says, do you want to make this read only, which is a good idea, which I also do. Right now, speaker repository doesn't. Go ahead.
Hadi, I do a lot of automated testing, but I don't do TDD. I don't start by writing the test, but I can see that with this, why people
It's so
who
much
use
easier.
TDD, it makes sense because like down in the index, this is maybe not the only place you'd say I want to have speaker repository get all. So I can see like creating tests that say, all right, what are the things that I want to do in my application? Well, I want to have a speaker repository get all, and I would do that in the test, and then it would create that, and then I could just use it over here.
Yeah, it's exactly. I mean,
that's interesting.
One of the cool things is that since it makes it so fluid and nice and fast to work with, it makes the whole TDD process much easier, much more comfortable to work with, right? And now here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say, but you see, notice again, it takes a convention. So you want to create an interface because you've got an I in front of it. Yes, I do.
Right.
So it's going to create the interface. Now this guy, again, I can hit Alt-Enter to make public. And what I want to do now, here's the problem. This speaker repository is in my web project, right?
Right. I don't want it there.
If I hit Alt-Enter, what it's going to do, it's going to move it to my web project, but in its own file. But what I want to do is I want to move this over to core. Can I move it to core, or should I create another project?
No, you don't want it to core because the core is just defining your domain. Just thinking.
Well, I mean, I guess okay.
I would put it in its own because you might end up with a circular reference down the road. I would just keep it aside.
Okay, well, I'll just put it in a new one for now, and that way we can show. I'll just follow the way you were explaining to me initially. So I'm going to call the conference app data, right? And thank you for this nice little class, which we'll delete. So where was I? I was here, right? So what I can do is, again, I can hit Alt-Enter. This will go into its own file, and then I can drag and drop it up and down. But the other alternative is to press Control-RO. Now what that is, that's actually a shortcut for the refactor move menu. Now if you don't have to remember that, what you can do is
shortcuts have shortcuts.
Shortcuts have shortcuts. Because actually I just say to people, try and remember a few keyboard shortcuts with ReSharper. One of them is Control-Shift-R. And Control-Shift-R brings up the refactor menu, which is context sensitive, right? And here you can see that I have moved to another file, I have moved to folder, I have these already. But I also have a whole bunch of other things. If I know that I'm only interested in moving, instead of having to get all this up, I can just press Control-RO and only get the move options, right? And here I'll say move to folder, not file, folder. And now what I can do is actually say, show me the core or the data project, right? You see, as I start to type, it picks up anything that matches, and I say, I want data. Hit enter, and in one click, it has now moved the speaker repository, the interface, over to iSpeaker repository over under app data. So in one operation, it has created its own file and it's moved it to a different project. Right?
Okay, but this file still needs
now this needs the reference.
Some help knowing where that is.
So done. Okay. So now I'm going to go over to the get all, hit Alt-Enter, and say create method. Speaker repository, so that's going to be an I list of speaker, right? And this guy is going to hit Alt-Enter to include speaker, and done, right? So now I'm all set, I guess. The only thing that's left is for me to create this view, which, well, actually, I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and create it. Create raise a partial view index. And what that should do is ask me what I want. Now I want a, yep, that's what I want, I guess. Why is that? I don't know why that's happening. Oh, what's wrong with that? Okay, I'm not gonna. We don't have time for this one. Let me just forget that.
Yeah, I would say let's work at fleshing out
Yeah.
get all, making sure that works.
Yeah.
Just because of the time.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
that's where we're going to start pulling in Entity Framework.
Yeah.
Even though some of the things we've done were done with some knowledge of Entity Framework. For the most part, so everything we've done so far, even defining the classes, doesn't really have anything to do with Entity Framework. The fact that I knew Code First was going to want that key, so we put that in the data annotation. But we could have even left that to Fluent API, and then the domain classes don't have to have any kind of comprehension of Entity Framework.
Okay. So now I'll create.
So let's flesh out get all.
Okay. So I'm going to create my own speaker repository here, and this guy is going to implement get all, right? So here we go. What do I do now?
Right. So now what we need, now this is where we need to have our persistence. So we need to use Entity Framework to go to a database and get speakers.
Okay.
Right? But we haven't created that Entity Framework code here. So we're going to have, I guess the code that I would write here would be, I'm going to have some kind of a context that's going to be managing it. So I would say context.speakers.toList. I know that's kind of backwards. I already know how to write the Entity Framework code, but this is what the Entity Framework code would look like. So we have a context that we're going to be using, and in the real world, I would be instantiating that context.
What if you want? We can create that.
I'm just having a hard time because this is backwards for me.
No, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we skip that? Let's do it your way. What would I do if I was doing it your way?
Let's go into data. We're in the data project.
Yeah.
And we're going to teach the data project about Entity Framework. So the first thing we need in that conference app data project is a reference to Entity Framework, and you can get that by NuGet. So you just want to install package entityframework.dll, or Entity Framework, I'm sorry.
So I can do other Windows, package manager console, and I can do install package.
You're on the wrong, you're pointing to the wrong project.
Yeah, I normally use the project name here.
Oh, okay. Yep, you can do that.
And then conference, and then it's data. Okay. So in my data project, I'm referencing Entity Framework, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's,
and we'll eventually, right, and we shouldn't need it anywhere else because the repository is also in the data project. This is where all our data access is going to be done.
Okay.
So Entity Framework isn't invading other pieces of the application. It's just in the data layer.
Correct.
Okay, so now that we have that, what we need is something that's going to manage all of the database interaction with respect to the classes. So there's going to be you need a new class that uses Entity Framework's DB context. DB context is the class in Entity Framework that does this management, that enables you to create and execute queries against the database and do change tracking while you're working with those objects, and also do updates, all that database persistence.
Okay, so what do I name this class? What?
Let's call it conference context.
Conference context. And this would be one per the entire Entity Framework, or would this be one per domain model, or
that's an architectural question. With this model that only has two classes in it, I would just put everything in here. But if you've got a large app with a lot of classes, you could create different models. You might even call this, why don't you rename that to conference model?
Conference model.
So it's, if I had a large domain with lots of classes, I would create different models, kind of domain-driven development, bounded context. I would create different models that represent different areas of my application.
Yeah.
But they would all point to the same database. So some areas of the application, I would use the conference model. Other areas of the application, I would use a different model that works with different classes in the bigger domain.
Okay.
All right. So with this needs to inherit the Entity Framework DB context class. That's going to give it the ability to do all of that work.
Okay. Done.
And that's right. That's where it is. And then in order to interact with those classes, we can create DB sets. That's another part of the DB context API. So we're going to create properties that are DB sets. They're generic DB sets of speaker, a DB set of speaker, a DB set of session.
Hold on. Speakers.
I love that it automatically knows how to pluralize that.
Session. Okay.
Okay. So using convention over configuration, this is really all we need. Just so you know, I could in here, you'd have to do it in a particular virtual method. If I wanted to define that key, say, hey, the key of speaker, you can't find it by convention, so here's what the property name is, I would do that in here. All those mappings, all those interesting things that are following Entity Framework's rules. I don't want Entity Framework's rules inside my classes, my domain classes, so I can put my Entity Framework related rules over in here if I wanted to. That's using the Fluent API, which is the other way to express the mappings.
Okay. Question for you.
But anyway, this is the for getting started. This is it. This is your data layer.
Okay, but question: Do I need this DB context DB set of session if I'm not accessing sessions?
That's a great question. You don't. If you're only going to be doing querying against the speakers, and then you're going to let speakers bring along sessions, whether there's a number of ways to do that, whether you're doing projections or eager loading or lazy loading, whatever, but there's a way to say bring along the sessions, then you don't need to expose a sessions DB set. But Entity Framework will understand that session goes in the model because it's reachable by speakers. It's going to automatically bring in this. It's automatically going to say session is part of the model, even if you don't have a DB set for querying against it.
And that's going to include updates as well. So if I if I eliminate this, I can still, through speakers, query them, add sessions to speakers, add speakers, add sessions to speakers, everything, right?
As long as the session is attached to a speaker, you'll be able to do all of that stuff with it.
Okay. So in principle,
you just can't work with them independently.
So in principle, I could eliminate that line, right?
That's right, and then you've got an aggregate root there.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna eliminate that for now. Right.
Okay. So let's go. I would now head back to the repository,
which I have,
and I would put in I would instantiate the context, but I would do it in a using because I want to instantiate it, do the database interaction, and then dispose of that context. So using I call it a context. So I usually use the variable context using context equals new conference model.
Okay.
Right, and then now what I can do is return. I'm going to return all the speakers that the context will get me. You just spelled context wrong in the line above.
Context. So what? I have speakers here, and now what would I do?
To list.
To list.
Which is link. So by just saying context speakers, that would only return an iQueryable. And we're not returning an iQueryable. We want to return a list. So by appending toList on there, that will literally go ahead and execute the query against the database, bring back the data, materialize all of that data into speaker objects, and then return the list of those speaker objects.
Okay. Sounds good.
Now, there's something else we don't have yet. Before we can run this, like, where is our data? Where is our data coming from? Where are we persisting our data? We don't even have a database.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you now.
Okay.
What do I do now?
So, code first, you can it is possible, absolutely, to work with an existing database. But if you've got a brand new application and you don't have a database, code first can create the database for you and actually manage it. I don't mean like a DBA, I mean in terms of migrating. But code first can create that database based on everything it learns about your model. It knows about the model by looking at the context, seeing everything that's represented in there. Through speakers, through the DB set it understands about speaker, but because speakers also gets us to session, it will also understand sessions in the model. So it will understand how to create the database and understand what the schema of the database is based on all of the conventions of code first. And again, if you want to tweak how it's going to infer the database, then you can use configuration to do that. So it understands that ID is a key here, and it will interpret that as being a primary key in the database.
Okay, but I mean, right now, I mean, I've got this. I don't know if this is going to talk to what database it's going to talk to, what database engine it's going to talk to. Where would I configure all of this stuff?
So again, by convention, there are conventions so that if you don't even say any of that, we don't even have a connection string, it will make assumptions about where the database is and what the name of this database is. So the absolute default for Entity Framework is SQL Express, but because you brought in Entity Framework 5, you'd find in your app config file do you notice it brought an app config file in here? Obviously your application, your MVC app isn't going to use that, but there's stuff in there that you can, it might be in your web config file already, this is already over. Let's see if it's in web config.
MVC by default pulls down Entity Framework. So
okay, so it should be in there.
Yeah.
Look down for the Entity Framework section. Keep scrolling down until you see the Entity Framework section. There's a lot in there.
Default connection factory type entity.
There it is.
SQL connection.
So
different. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. It doesn't use the. Notice there's a difference. The app config that was created when we used NuGet to bring this in.
No, it's the same.
Huh.
It's the same thing. It's Entity Framework.
And you're using Visual Studio 2012?
Yeah.
That's weird. I expect it. I don't know why it's using SQL Connection Factory. Normally, it defaults by saying use the DB local, but you might not have. Maybe you don't have SQL Server 2012 here, and it understood that. Anyway, it's not going to overwrite that. So it's going to use. I think it's going to look for SQL Express by default. That is the default for Entity Framework, unless you change the connection factory to a different provider or actually provide a connection string. So it'll look for SQL Express, and it'll look for a database. Since you haven't provided a database name, it'll look for a database that has the same name as the strongly typed name of the context. So in your case, that's going to be the conference app.data.speaker model or conference model. It'll look in SQL Express for a database of that name. If it doesn't find it, it will create it.
So it's going to create a database called conference model.
Yes.
So going back to the question that I asked you previously, which is, what if I have two of these? Then what would it do?
Two of what?
Of,
two contexts or two DB sets?
Two contexts. So you should only have one context basically per app, right? Normally.
Well, what I do in the case where I have multiple contexts that I want to point to the same database, there's a way to specify what connection string to use or what database to use. What I've been doing is I have a base class that inherits from DB context, and in that base class I configure, I just write some code, entity framework code, that says here's the name, here's the database, here's where to find all the database information. So whenever one of these gets instantiated, it will lean on that. So if you're going to have multiple models, you don't want the default behavior, because the default behavior will use different databases.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions because based on the time, just a quick one, and then I wanted to see if we can quickly show an example of how to add and like update information from here. But a quick one here is these need to be public, the properties, or does it work with, or do they need to be virtual, or do they need to have specific requirements? Because like nhibernate needs for lazy loading, it requires things to be virtual.
For lazy loading, the navigation properties that you would lazy load would also need to be virtual.
Okay.
And you need to tell the context that lazy loading is enabled. Like you need to, so it's a combination of things.
Okay.
So if you tell the context lazy loading is enabled, but you don't have the properties set up for lazy loading, then those properties won't get lazy loaded. So it's a combination of things.
Okay. I mean, it's way too much to cover in an hour. But if we can, if you don't mind, Julie, if we can just go back to the speaker repository, right? And let's say that I have a method here which is add speaker, okay? And it takes in a speaker, right? So for example, I could have speaker. Now, how would I use this? Again, using context?
Instantiate the context. So in this scenario, with a web app, we're always going to be disconnected. You've got the wrong. It doesn't say conference. You're not instantiating conference model.
Okay.
There you go. So what I would do now is context. I would start with a context and then speakers, and then say I want to add this speaker into the speakers DB set.
Okay.
Okay, and then I would need to save. Maybe I would then context.save changes.
Okay. So
that is what executes it.
So that's
for adding a new one.
Okay. That's an
now
interest...
if you
go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, with regard to the web app, what is the normal best practice kind of to keep the context? Do you keep the context? Do you create the context each time? How do you do that?
No, you definitely want, with a web app, you want to have what we refer to as a short-lived context. So you want to really instantiate it, do the work you want to do, and then dispose it.
So in essence, I could basically use this the way it is right now for my web app, right? Yes. I wouldn't need to have any kind of unit of work pattern or anything like that implemented outside or in addition to this outside. Because there is, like, for example, within Hibernate, we used to have a unit of work a lot of times associated with a request, and then on the termination of the request, you would flush and do things like that. Here,
well, you can. The context, I also use unit of work when I'm getting more complex with my applications and building out all kinds of different things. I have a Pluralsight course called Entity Framework in the Enterprise, and I definitely have unit of work, and there's interfaces, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. In a simple scenario like this, the context itself becomes the unit of work.
Okay, great.
But again, this is just for a simple perspective of an application. I want to point out that I just want to make sure you understand that if you are going to be updating something, you have to be careful with that add method. It makes logical sense to say, well, I'm going to add, I'm adding the speaker into my speakers repository, even though I want it to get updated. By using the add method, Entity Framework will flag it so that it understands it's going to be inserted. So we do have to go, we would use, there's a number of different things you can do to control that, different ways to take advantage of that. I just wanted to point that out because it's the only one we're looking at right now.
Okay.
And it's probably the only one we're going to look at today, considering the time.
Yeah. No, I mean,
it's just a look at it.
Yeah.
Do you want to try to execute the get all, and it won't return anything, but you can see that it will create the database for you, or you can do the add one, create a new one. Do you have the views set up to already work?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. And seeing the time, I'm wondering because I don't want to mess down there.
Sure. And I also there's a couple other things I just want to say is, this is just like just the tip of the needle here, right? Yeah. It's just a really beginning of it. There's people are like, but what about this? What about that? What about all these different kinds of things? It's a very complex framework, and there's all kinds of things you can do. You can do enterprise development with it, and for example, you can migrate the database. If you make a change to your classes, there's something called code first migrations where you can it will update the schema of the database for you. But for unit testing or integration testing, I actually find it useful to use one of the database initialization features to just drop and totally recreate a database on the fly for the integration test, so we always have the same database.
Right.
And you can see data with code first. You can see data with migrations. There's just all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't cover all of it in 1 hour, but I think that, well, at least I've got now enough to get up and running, and the key questions have been answered.
Oh yeah,
that is awesome. So yeah, I think I mean the only other thing, because I don't think we can run this. It'll crash and die on me. But so
do you want to hit some of the questions before we leave?
Yeah. We're gonna get to that. I just wanted to. Dima, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. There's a large number of questions.
Okay, so let's get to questions.
Some of them at least.
Maybe they should be a blog post.
Go ahead. Dima, can you read them out?
Yeah. Yep, okay. Sure. Okay, so the first question is, Julie, can you please define large app, i.e. when do I start using different contexts?
I wouldn't do it if I only have two or it's such a hard thing. It's not like 100. I mean, I would do it when I have, if I have like 15, I would probably by then be using a couple of different contexts. It's really about, your application and at what point you start finding that some of those extra classes are starting to get in the way. Like the context class is getting hard to maintain, right? That's one place. But really, if you're thinking from a perspective of domain-driven development, I like to organize them. I like to organize my contexts to really represent what I'm doing in different areas of my application. But sometimes even if with that perspective, your domain, the size of your domain, the number of classes you have is so small, it really doesn't make sense to just start doing all that extra coding. There's not a real number I can associate with it. It's a hard question to answer. Sorry.
Okay. Another question. Having multiple models in your project, does that increase performance, or is it just for logical layout?
You can get performance benefits with that, because Entity Framework, the first time in your application process that Entity Framework uses a model, it has to do a bunch of work to bring that model into memory and create the metadata, in-memory metadata, and do all this understanding how the model relates to everything. So the larger the model is, the more effort that is at runtime, just that one time, that very first time. Once it's done, all that stays in memory for the application process. But so there can definitely be a performance gain for
Dimitri,
that particular area.
Dimitri?
Yes.
Hi. Sorry.
Yep.
Since we're running overtime, I think we just keep like one more question, and then the other ones we can try and follow up later with the blog post or follow up to the webinar, because otherwise
all right,
it's
so
never ending.
Okay, let's do one last question. So
find a good one.
If you alter properties on one or more sessions in the speaker list, how do you make EF check which ones are changed?
Oh, and it depends on if you're connected or disconnected when that change is happening, right? If, say, you're in a WPF application, then you would probably, a client-side application, you'd be using a long-running context. Entity Framework will be able to keep track of that because it's aware of the classes, of the objects, and the changes you're making to them. But if you're working disconnected, then that gets trickier, which one changed and which one didn't change. What I do is I actually have my classes inherit from a custom base class or maybe an interface where I can provide a local property that just identifies the state of a particular instance. And then as I'm making changes, I make sure I change that flag. Then when that comes back over to the server side, I have to read that and then tell Entity Framework, this is added, this is inserted, or this is added, this is modified, and this one is not, that nothing happens, so don't worry about it. So working and disconnected, there's a little more effort that you have to make for letting Entity Framework understand about the state of entities, because when you're disconnected, it's stateless. Great.
So I mean, Julie, just to mention that you've got 16 hours of course on ProSite already done, and your book. So if people want to dig deeper into this, as I said, in 1 hour we can't cover everything. So, but you're more than welcome to look up all the work that Julie's done, because she's done some great work around.
Thanks, Hadi.
So just to wrap up, thanks, Dima. To wrap up, the recording will be posted on jetbrains.tv. If you want more information about ReSharper, it's jetbrains.com/ReSharper. We've also got some more videos and stuff like that around ReSharper on JetBrains TV. We'll be announcing more webinars. There's a bunch coming up. There's one with TeamCity and Octopus Deploy coming up in a couple of weeks. And we normally announce those on blog.jetbrains.com or the Twitter handle JetBrains. And contacts I've left here, that's Julie Lerman's, mine, and Dimitri that's been handling all the questions gracefully for us. So thanks.
I'm going to be practicing my new keyboard shortcuts.
You better. I'm gonna check with you. In a year, I want 3 more, eh?
Okay.
So Julie, really appreciate it a ton. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks a lot.
I had a lot of fun. And thanks everybody for watching, and apologies for running a little bit over time, but hoping it was worth it. So thanks everyone. Bye-bye. Bye, Julie.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye.